Okay, let's do this. Um, what do I want to talk about today? So I want to talk about what's going on in the Department of Defense right now and give an update um, about the so-called reinstatement and back pay plan. And I say so-called because I want to dispel some ideas out there as to what exactly this plan entails and doesn't entail, because it's not quite as simple as just being a plan about reinstatement and back pay. It's not even as simple as just being a plan about reinstatement. There we need to approach this plan with some nuance. So this is an important topic, even if you're not in the military. And I have often said, and I suppose I've been saying it now for, I don't know, 2 years, 2+ years or whatever, that even if you are not in the military, and even if you have no connection per se to people who are in the military, like let's say you don't necessarily have close family members or friends that are in the military, you yourself are not necessarily a veteran, that's okay. But you still need to pay attention to what happens in the military because, as I've said many times, what happens in the military often serves as an indicator of what is going to happen in society at large. So it's important that we understand that. So even if you're not necessarily personally tied to the military or close to those who are, this video, you may still find it interesting, and I would encourage you to check it out and maybe share it with other people who might also find it interesting. So I'm going to talk about some updates that have recently come out for this reinstatement plan. But let's do a quick review. Let's review how we got to where we are. Okay. So, we're approaching mid-April and President Trump was inaugurated on January 20th. So he's almost been in office for 3 months, not quite 3 months. So let's kind of review what's happened in the last almost 3 months. So January 20th, inauguration day. I still remember Trump was giving his inauguration speech. I was not listening to that speech because if I want to watch, make believe, I'll, watch a movie or watch a TV show. I don't need to tune into, political theater. Anyway, so I wasn't watching, but my phone starts blowing up. So many people started contacting me, sending me messages, texting me, like all this stuff, like all at the exact same time. It was very weird. And I realized immediately Trump must have said something during his inauguration speech, and it must have to do with this, because why else would all these people, blow up my phone at exactly the same time? So what did he say? Well, this is exactly what he said. Quote, "This week, I will reinstate any service members who were unjustly expelled from our military for objecting to the COVID vaccine mandate with full back pay," unquote. All right, let me say that again. So this is President Trump during his inauguration speech, January 20th, 2025. Quote, "This week, I will reinstate any service members who were unjustly expelled from our military for objecting to the COVID vaccine mandate with full back pay," unquote. And that's pretty much what he said. There was no mention of the mandate being unlawful. There was no mention of accountability for this having happened at all. There was no mention of what about those who remained in service but had their careers severely impacted because of the mandate, or those who were physically injured. No mention of any of that. So a week later, Trump's executive order was released, and I went through that. So if you want to go back, if some of this is news to you, or if you never quite caught this when this happened, so I have videos on this. I have a video on my initial thoughts on Trump's statement during the inauguration. And then I also have a video in which I went through the executive order. And then I also have a video on the actual plan that would come out in early February. But anyway, so what happened on January 27th? So a week after the inaugural speech, President Trump's executive order is released. And there were some key words in there that were helpful. They didn't go far enough, but there were some that were at least helpful. He used these descriptors about the mandate, such as it being unfair overbroad, completely unnecessary. He referred to these wrongful dismissals. That's all good. Doesn't go nearly far enough. Nothing about it being, unlawful, but he at least did characterize it in a way that shows that it was a bad idea. Now, again, I don't think that goes nearly far enough, but it's not nothing. It was somewhat helpful. He also mentions two groups. He mentions in the executive order those who were involuntarily separated from military service, this number that is 8,500, 86, 8,700, somewhere around in there. Those were the ones who were kicked out against their will. And then he also mentions that there's a much larger number, or he mentions that there's another group of people who voluntarily left the service, but they left because of the COVID shot mandate. And the way the executive order was written, it was a little bit ambiguous, so a little bit open for interpretation. I mentioned that in the video in which I reviewed the executive order. But it looked as if back pay wasn't necessarily assured for that group of those who voluntarily left. Okay. And again, in that executive order, there was no mention of the mandate being unlawful, no mention of accountability, no mention of those who remained in service, but whose careers had been severely impacted because of the mandate, and no mention of those who had been injured, and certainly no mention of those who had been killed by the COVID shot. So that's January 27th. The EO comes out. So fast forward, a week and a half or so, and on February 6th, there is a memo that comes out from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, saying, hey, well, first of all, in that memo, he characterizes the COVID shot as an experimental vaccine. So that was curious that he calls it experimental, but yet he won't say the mandate was unlawful. But you can't lawfully mandate an experimental product. So a little bit of a disconnect there, but he at least called it experimental. It's inconsistent to call the product experimental and then not characterize the mandate as unlawful, but still, he at least, that's at least a step in the right direction. I don't think the shot is a vaccine. He called it an experimental vaccine, but whatever, we can quibble about that later. In that February 6th memo, and again, I went through this in a previous video. You can find it. I went through all the guidance from that plan that was published February 6th and February 7th. But in this February 6th memo from Pete Hegseth, he says, I am directing my Undersecretary of Defense for personnel and readiness to put together a plan for how we're going to bring these people back. That Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, the following day, February 7th, published the guidance to implement that plan, right? And that's what I went through in a previous video. So what did that plan say in very broad terms? It established a process for allowing people to seek reinstatement using something that already exists in the military. It's a process that can be used for correcting records. It's called the Board for Corrections of Military/Naval Records. So the BCMR for short, or BCMNR. That's something that already exists. So it wanted to take this existing mechanism and then use it specifically to address this issue and assist people who wanted to come back to service in doing so. And in that guidance, it focuses on those who are involuntarily separated, this 86, 8,700 number of people. And for them, it says your service branch, Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever, will contact you and will make you aware of how you could seek reinstatement, the process that you got to go through. And it also said that they would be offered credit for the time lost as time served. So what that means is, hey, you were kicked out on this date. So when you come back on this date, however much time that is, we're going to credit you as if that time had been served. So let's just say that's 3 years. So we will credit you as if you were in the military that entire time serving. You get credit for those 3 years. And then because we're going to credit you that, we're also going to give you the back pay, the pay that you would have earned during that time period. And by signing back up, you're going to sign a new contract. You're going to serve at least a minimum of 2 years. So that's what was in this plan. That's what was outlined for the group of those who were involuntarily separated. those who were kicked out against their will. But it also mentions those who are voluntarily separated. And for them, it was a little bit different. So it said, we're not going to contact all of you individually because there may be 80 to 100,000 or more of you. What it says is, hey, we're going to do a broad outreach program, on the service websites and via social media, et cetera, right? And we're going to broadly advertise the process that you would need to go through in order to rejoin the service. Because you left voluntarily, you get no credit for time lost as time served. So if you left, 3 years ago, and then you come back 3 years later, no credit for those 3 years. Those 3 years are lost. So you will come back at the rank that you held, but you won't get credit for those 3 years in this case that you would have lost, and therefore you get no back pay. Okay, so that's kind of the key difference between those who were kicked out against their will and the others who were so-called voluntarily separated. They chose to leave. I'm in that category according to the military because I resigned, which I did do. We'll talk about whether or not that's truly voluntary or not. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. But in that plan, published in this memo by the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness on February 7th, there was no mention of accountability. There was no mention of those who remained in service but had their careers severely impacted by the COVID shot mandate. No mention of those who were injured or worse, by the shot. And certainly no mention of it being unlawful, the whole mandate or the implementation of the mandate being unlawful. Now, what has happened since then? Because I've talked about all that previously, in my previous videos in much more detail. But what has happened recently that I need to talk to you about today? So today's what, April 11th, I think. On April 1st, insert, mandatory April Fool's joke. New guidance was issued. So again, I don't know. Did they mean to do that on April Fool's Day? I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Cruel joke. But once again, just like previously, they issued this guidance. In my mind, if I'm wrong and I didn't see it, okay. But it seems like they kind of issued it quietly, just like they did on February 6th and February 7th. Nobody saw this stuff until 5 or 6 days later. They didn't issue it to great fanfare and say, hey, listen, we're trying to make this right, and immediately make everyone aware of it. No, it wasn't until the following week that people even realized this had been published. So it's, do you want people to know about this or not? Well, with this, so I would say I found out about it, I don't know, roughly 3 days ago, maybe 4 days ago. Well, that would have been nearly a week after this new updated guidance would have been published on April 1st. All right, so what does the new guidance entail? Well, let's go through that. So let me bring it up, right? I want to go through this. All right, let's glasses here. And let's look at this. Okay, so grab this, guys. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So we're looking at a memorandum from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, okay, which is where we got the previous guidance from February 7th. So no surprise there. This is dated April 1st. So this is, what is this? Updated guidance on the correction of military records for service members involuntarily separated for refusal to comply with coronavirus disease 2019 vaccination requirements. Okay. All right. So I am not going to read this whole thing. Most of it we don't need to read. There are a few critical areas that we do need to read. All right. This memorandum provides updated guidance. So we're going to look at that. So what is it supposed to do? It is supposed to implement Executive Order 14184, which was the executive order that was published on January 27, 2025. And then also the SecDef's memo, which was published on February 6th. And then the actual implementation plan that was published on February 7th. Okay. And it actually says that's hereby rescinded. So this is updating the plan that had already been put out there. All right, I just talked you through all of those. I just talked you through Trump's initial statements during his inaugural speech. I just talked you through the EO. I talked you through the memos of February 6th and February 7th. So here's where we are now, April 1st. All right, so I'm not going to read through all of this because all of this is basically just kind of a rehash of what was in the previous plan. If you don't know what was in the previous plan, go watch my other video. By previous plan, I mean the plan that was published February 7th. Okay, so let's go through. What are we looking at here? All right, secretaries of the military department. That means Army, Navy, Air Force, blah, blah, blah. Implement a public information outreach program. We already knew that. Implement a screening process to identify those former service members that were involuntarily separated. Got it. An eligibility assessment process. Again, so this was all in the previous guidance. Implement a process to facilitate expedited and fair consideration of eligible reinstatement. Okay, got it. Coordinate with the Defense Finance Accounting Service, DFAS, DHA, and the VA to implement an assistance process to facilitate expedited estimation of the pecuniary and other benefits entitled to a former service member. All right, so we got to figure out how much back pay the service member is entitled to, okay? Now, with specific, reference to those who they consider involuntary separations, meaning the military kicked you out. All right, let's just go through what are the changes. All right, so the outreach program, consistent with the executive order, the secretaries of the military departments will invite those service members to seek reinstatement by applying to have their records corrected to reflect continued service such that back pay, benefits, bonus payments, or other compensation subject to required offsets will be available. Okay, there's some good and some bad in this. They're going to give you back pay. And your back pay is going to be more than just your basic pay. It's going to include some other types of pay that you would have been entitled to. That's good. But it's also going to be subjected to various offsets. Okay, well, what kind of offsets? We'll get there. Because that should raise a red flag. Okay, what kind of offsets? Like what would, when you're calculating the back pay that so-and-so is owed, are there certain deductions that you would make to the back pay that you would owe them? Because this is what this reads like. All right, so keep that in mind. Offsets to the back pay. Now let's go down further. Okay, the written outreach materials will include an advisement that reinstatement will not be afforded to those who are unwilling or unable to return to active service or active status as applicable for 4 years. The plan that was published on February 7th listed a commitment of 2 years. It's now 4. They changed it. Now 4 years. You want to come back? You got to come back for 4 years. If you're not willing to come back for 4 years, you get nothing. No back pay, nothing. 4 years. They changed it. So from February 7th to April 1st, they changed it from 2 years to 4 years. For those who were involuntarily separated, you were kicked out against your will, you want to come back, you decide that you're going to come back. We're going to calculate your back pay that we owe you. We're going to credit you that time lost as time served. We're going to make some deductions to the back pay that we owe you. And you got to sign a contract for 4 years. You got to come back for 4 years, not 2. All right. So let's go through here. A lot of this is the same as the previously published plan. Okay, reinstatement election. Following receipt of their compensation payment estimate, the former service member will have 60 days to consider and to decide whether to accept reinstatement. What does that mean? Hey, service member, you have told us, the military, your branch, you were in the Army beforehand or whatever. You have told the Army, I want to come back. The Army does a calculation, like an estimate of the back pay that they owe you. They give that to you. Hey, this is what we think we owe you in back pay if you come back. All right. So it's kind of like, here's the deal we're offering you. You come back, we're going to credit your time lost as time served. You're going to get this amount of money that we think we owe you for back pay. We've calculated it out. You come back, you owe us 4 years. That's the deal. Do you accept? So you're made aware of that. You now have 60 days to decide once they give you that estimate of the back pay. Acceptance will be submitted in writing and include an acknowledgement of the 4-year service commitment, not 2. 4. Reinstatement of members involuntarily separated will not be afforded to those who are unwilling or unable to return to active service or active status, as applicable for at least 4 years. So you're like, hey, I'm not going back for 4 years. Then no deal. That's what the military is going to say to you. No deal. Okay, well, what if this is, so right here, or unable to return to active service? What if you were in a car accident since you got out and you suffered a pretty significant injury and now you're no longer medically fit for service? My assumption reading this is you're going to be deemed unfit for military service and you're not going to get anything. That's the way I read this. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm telling you guys the way that I read this. A 2-year minimum service obligation is available for individuals who would have become eligible for a regular or non-regular retirement in 2 years or less from the date of their separation if they had not been separated solely due to their refusal to comply with the COVID vaccine mandate or vaccination mandate. Okay. If you were within 2 years or less of retirement and you were kicked out, then in that case, they will say, you don't have to come back for 4 years because you were within 2 years of retirement. So you can come back for 2 years. Now, somebody might say out there, hey, Brad, isn't that you? No, it's not. So I served 19 years, 3 months, and 15 days on active service. But you got to remember, everything that we're going through right now in this part of the memo applies to those who were involuntarily separated. They were kicked out. I resigned. So, the Army views mine as voluntary. Now, I do have some problems with that characterization. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so if you were kicked out, you want to come back, you owe 4 years, unless you were within 2 years or less from your retirement date, in which case they will only require of you a 2-year minimum service obligation. Now, I have some problems with this, with both the 4 years and the 2 years. So first of all, I have a real problem that the initial guidance said 2 years and now they've changed it to 4. They're moving in the wrong direction. They are making it, they're putting more obstacles, they're making less concessions to the service member who was wronged, and they're requiring more from the service member who was wronged. That is messed up. That is messed up. If DoD was serious about fixing this problem, which they are not. I'm sorry, they're not. They're not serious about fixing this problem. They refuse to call it unlawful, and they refuse to make the concessions to make this as easy and as seamless as possible for the service member who was wronged. When you screw someone over, when you wrong them, you make it right. You make it right. And if you got to find some middle ground, you should be the one making more concessions than the wronged party. That's what I don't like about this. I think the 4-year service commitment is too much. I thought the 2-year was okay. I have a lot of problems with this whole thing. I think they require too much from the service member. They should go through and do an audit and fix all these records. Anyway, whatever. I do not like the 4 years. And I certainly don't like that they originally published it as 2 and now they changed it to 4. The 2-year minimum service obligation for Those who would have retired in less than 2 years, I do like the fact that they are conceding a little bit more than they are for others who are further away from retirement or whatever. They're acknowledging that some of these individuals were very close to retirement. But people have brought up a really good point. Let me use myself as an example. Now, this doesn't apply to me because I was not involuntarily separated, but let's assume that I were. I was 8.5 months away from qualifying for retirement. So if I was in this category, why, if I was only 8.5 months from retirement, why should I have to sign up for 2 years? What, you wronged me. You forced me out. I don't care what normal policies you have. Make exceptions to policy in order to make this right. So you should offer me a contract that takes me to my retirement date. I don't care whether or not that's not typically how it's done. We're not in a typical scenario. We don't typically break the law and violate the Constitution and force products on people that are experimental that they should never have to take, that end up, harming readiness and physically injuring people and, severing trust all up and down the chain of command. We're in territory that we're not typically in. So none of this is normal. So the military, if they cared about fixing this, which they do not. But if they did, they would make concessions to the service members. They keep saying like, we're going to make this right. We're going to make this right. We're even going to issue letters of apology. As if anybody gives a shit about a letter of apology. But if they truly cared about making this right, they would not have language like this in the memo. So using myself as an example, I should be able to contract for, 8.5 months or 9 months, or at most 1 year, not 2. And I don't care. I don't care if that would require some exception to the way things are typically done. These aren't normal times, So Department of Defense, fix this. All right, let's move down here. Okay, so voluntary separation. So that's me. That's people who resigned. That's people who didn't re-enlist because they didn't, want to go through with the whole COVID shot mandate, and they realized it was nonsense, and they weren't going to support it. And so they left voluntarily, but they left voluntarily because there was an unlawful mandate that was being implemented and all the coercion that goes along with that. So again, even calling these separations voluntary is, I think it's a mischaracterization of exactly what happened. Okay. I understand that resignation is typically considered to be voluntary, but if you are coerced in a way that forces you to make a decision that you otherwise would not make, is that voluntary? You broke the law, you backed people into a corner, they made a decision to leave this corrupt institution, and rather than fix the institution, you're going to do everything you can to not make it right with those who were wrong. I have a real problem with that. I have a real problem with the DoD misrepresenting these actions as trying to make this right. They're not trying to make this right. They are creating the illusion that they're trying to make this right, but nothing about this shows that they truly want to address the fundamental problems. I got asked by a retired 3-star. So a retired 3-star admiral, less than a week ago, asked me, so you're not going to go back and get your, get your retirement? That's the way he phrased the question. As if my sole justification for going back would be for money. A badly phrased question that I, to some degree, I found insulting, if I'm being honest. And I looked at him, I looked him right in the eyes, and I said, why would I go back? None of the problems over which I resigned have even been addressed. This is all just window dressing here. None of the fundamental problems are being addressed. Yeah, they'll talk about DEI. Great. The DEI initiatives should be abolished, and that stuff was problematic. It's very problematic. Of course, I agree with getting rid of all the DEI nonsense. But all that DEI nonsense did not cause a tenth of the problems that this caused. So yeah, fix the DEI stuff. Sure, great. But fix this. And if you had to fix one or the other, fix this. You know? All right. So voluntary separations. We're going to talk about this right here. So outreach materials will include an advisement that reaccession will require a minimum 2-year period of active service. All right. What does that mean? The same as the previous plan. This is interesting. If you were involuntarily kicked out and you want to come back, you got to come back for 4 years, unless you were within 2 years of retirement. If you voluntarily left the service and you want to come back, you are only required to sign a new contract of a 2-year minimum. Very interesting. Now, why? Why are they requiring more from those who are kicked out? I'm assuming it's because of the back pay and the credit, of time lost as time served. I'm assuming that because they're giving you that, they're going to require a greater commitment from you coming back. That's my assumption. So me, because I'm in this group, if I were to go back, I would not get back pay. So I've been out for a little over, just a hair over 2.5 years. So let's just call it 30 months. So I've been out for 30 months, almost 31 months now. But I would not get any credit for those 2.5 years as time served. So I would go back to my rank that I had before. So yeah, they'd say, hey, you were a lieutenant colonel. We'll make you a lieutenant colonel again. But now I'd be 2.5 years behind where I was. By the time I went through this process and actually made it in, it'd be 3 years. So now I'm 3 years behind my peers. I mean, like, why would I do that? Like, why would I accept this? No back pay. I was fired from my job. So I was relieved of my battalion command position. Hundreds of my soldiers, witnessed their battalion commander leave, get relieved of command. I was treated like a pariah. And then I resigned. I said, I'm not going to be part of this corrupt institution. Not to mention the fact that I thought, this is all part of a treasonous op, which, now there's just so much more evidence to showcase that was, of course, true. But anyway, but none of those problems are even being addressed. So why would I go back? Especially when I look at, if I cared about things like this, you're not even making me an offer that I would consider. No back pay, no credit for the 30 or 31 months that I've lost. So how are you trying to make this right by me? You're not. Why? Because you don't want me back. That's why you're not willing to say that this was unlawful. Because here's the thing. If they were to say that this was unlawful, then they would have to acknowledge, first of all, they'd have to hold a lot of people accountable, because they would have to say, well, we had a lot of people break the law, which you did. That's true, military. You should be cleaning house right now. But also you would have to then say, we have to treat these voluntary separations pretty much the same as the involuntary separations, because we backed them into a corner. These people left rather than comply with this implementation of the mandate that was unlawful. We can't punish them for that. And that's why they won't do it. They won't do it. They don't want to clean house. They don't want to admit that they broke the law. They don't want to admit that their senior leaders don't give a shit about the Constitution of the United States. And they don't want to pay out all this money and bring people back. And they certainly don't want to bring people back who care more about their oath to the Constitution than they do about a paycheck. Those are the type of people whose integrity could not be bought. That is not the type of people that the military wants in its ranks. The military wants people in its ranks who can be controlled. People who can be told exactly what to do, and they will do it without question, as long as they're given a justification that is just plausible enough. Just plausible enough that these people with mediocre integrity, that's in their mid to senior ranks. I'm not talking about every single person in the military, but I am talking about the or cadre of senior officers and many of the enlisted officers as well, and plenty of the senior enlisted folks too. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, now this is important. So I do have to give kind of some credit to this policy. So it is important that we say this. Their return to service. This is those like myself voluntarily left the service. Their return to service will include restoration of same rank and pay. Reaccession under this policy will not include back pay, credit for lost service, or similar relief associated with reinstatement. Okay, got it. No back pay, no credit for lost service. However, nothing in this policy prohibits or prevents those former service members, like myself, seeking reaccession. Oh, I'm sorry, hold on. Nothing in this policy prohibits or prevents those former service members seeking reaccession from seeking additional relief, such as back pay or lost service credit through the normal BCM-NR process, Board of Corrections for Military or Naval Records. What does that mean? Using myself as an example, and the other 80 to 100,000 folks in situations like mine. This process that has been specifically created for the the COVID shot mandate and bringing people back, according to this specific policy, there's no back pay or credit for lost service. But people like me could still individually apply through the normal BCM-NR process, not the one that is this COVID specific one, COVID shot mandate specific one, but we can still apply through the normal process. All right, I got it. Okay, are you really throwing people a bone there? Well, like I said, I want to give credit where credit is due. I want to at least acknowledge that they leave the door open for you to seek relief through some other process. Great. But my issue with that is you have this process which you have put in place to specifically fix this issue. Service members should not have to go to some other process when this was put in place to fix it. And this is supposed to be expedited. So fix it in this process. So why force people to go to another process that won't be expedited and hasn't been set up to specifically review these cases and will probably take much longer? And who knows what the chances are of people who go that route actually getting awarded their back pay or whatever, or their credit for lost service or whatever. So again, I feel like this is, it's not much of a concession. But nonetheless, it's still important. I need to at least say that they do have this in here, Okay. Let's see what we got here. All right, I don't really want to go through this. I'm going to put the link to this. You guys can read through this on your own if you really want. So here's a letter from March 28th, 2025. Dear fellow veteran, it is with great pleasure that I invite you to return to service in the finest military in history. Your career ended too soon, and on behalf of Secretary Hegseth, the Department of Defense is eager to welcome you back. Is that true? Is that true? Secretary Hegseth is committed to reviving the warrior ethos and restoring trust in our military. And I hope you choose to contribute your skill and experience to that effort. Thank you for your service to the United States of America, and I hope to welcome you back soon. All right, so Tim Dill, performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Okay, all right. Do they really want you back? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Do you guys think this is legitimate? Okay, we do need to talk about this. Financial benefits of COVID-19 reinstatement. This is an explanation of the potential financial benefits and required offsets that may result from reinstatement by the Board of Corrections for Military Records. The reinstatement period is the time between the separation date and the date you return to service. Okay, you were kicked out on this date 3 years ago. You come back on this date. That was 3 years or whatever. Okay, we owe you 3 years of back pay. All right, what's that back pay going to consist of? Okay, here's what we're going to pay you potentially. We got to calculate it all out. Here's what we're going to pay you. Potential pay and allowances minus required offsets. All right, so we're going to give you the green minus the red. So basic pay. All right. So if you're in the military, you know what all this stuff means. Other people that may not be familiar with these terms, we're not going to go and define all of these. But I actually like this because when I look at this list, I'm like, this to me looks like they're trying to compensate you as much as they can. It's not just basic pay. A lot of people had that question. Will it only be basic pay? It's also going to be your BAS. It's also going to be your BAH from your last permanent duty station. Now, people who are in the military, they know what these terms mean. They know what COLA means. All right. And other bonus payments. So I like that. I like that. It to me, that looks like, hey, we're we're trying to give you as much compensation as you deserve, not just the basic pay. Okay. Now here's the red flag. Maybe that's why it's in red. I don't know. All right. Required offsets. And this is the big one. Wages earned from any job or self-employment during reinstatement period. Now, these others I can kind of understand, you know, like, lump sum leave payments, DoD debts. Like, yeah, obviously, if you owe the DoD any money, they're going to deduct that when they're paying you back pay. Okay. But this one I think is unconscionable. Wages earned from any job or self-employment during the reinstatement period. So here's what they mean. We kicked you out of the military 3 years ago, right? To use that example. For the last 3 years, you've been working wherever and you've been earning money. Whatever money you earned, that's going to be deducted. What if you had a job in which you were making more pay than what you earned from the military? Does that mean your back pay would be zero? Or what if you earned nearly the same, you know? So was your back pay going to be, very, very, very little? So I don't like this. And you know, I understand the alternative. So let's say for 3 years you went and worked this other job. And let's just say in this other job, in the civilian world, wherever, you were making roughly the same amount of money that you were making in the military. Let's just say that as an example. So over the last 3 years, you basically earned what you would have earned in the military. Now, if they were to give you full back pay, now what that would mean is over the last 3 years, well, now you would have earned twice what you would have made if you had never left the military. That's true. So the military says, we're not going to do that. But I say, why not? It's not the service member's fault that you kicked them out unlawfully and they went and got another job to support themselves and their families. That's not their fault. Give them the money that they're owed. That money that they received in a civilian job or whatever has nothing to do with what the federal government owes them. Has nothing to do with it. Make it right. Stop punishing those that you've already wronged. I think this is, it was already theft when you stole people's jobs and you kicked them out or you forced them out and then called it voluntary and now you won't give them back pay. That's theft. That is theft. But this right here is you stealing from somebody. Again, that's what this is. Or you trying to say, hey, I'm sorry we stole your job from you, but now I'm only going to give you part of your job back. That's kind of what this is. So I have a real problem with this. Yeah, I realized that yeah, somebody would make out pretty well if they went and got a job and then they got full back pay. But hey, you wronged them. Make it right. When they left, they didn't necessarily know that the military was going to come back a couple of years later and give them back pay. It's not their fault that they went and got, a new job so that they could put food on the table, so they could pay their rent, pay their mortgage. I mean, like what did you expect? For them just to sit around and twiddle their thumbs, wait for the military to come to its senses, and here we are, 3.5 years after the mandate went into effect, and the military still hasn't come to its senses. So I have a real problem with this. I have a real problem with this. Again, just one more example of the DoD showing unequivocally that it does not care to get this right. All right. So again, if you guys want to look through all this, you certainly can. I don't know that there's anything else that I necessarily want to go through here. But you guys, you'll see I'll send you the link. You guys can find all of this. But there's one more thing that I got to show you. Okay. This is if you think the back pay is bad, this is bad. And I'm going to show you the link where you can find this document too. So I saw this yesterday or the day before. People started to post it, and I was as shocked as other people when I said, that's not true. I wasn't shocked because I don't find any of this to be shocking. It's just more of the same. I was pissed, but I wasn't shocked. Okay. None of this is shocking. It's just, it's what we expect. Okay. If you voluntarily left the service, this is me, right? I'm in this category. If you want to come back, you have to sign an attestation. So like kind of, an official statement, almost like a sworn statement, right? In which you are attesting to the fact that, hey, I left the service because of the COVID shot mandate, not for some other reason. Not because I got in trouble and my military career was, or when I say that, like got in trouble for something totally unrelated to the COVID shot mandate. That's the real reason that I left. Okay. What you're saying is I left exclusively because of the COVID shot mandate, not for some other reason, not because my career was going nowhere or I got in trouble for something unrelated or I was tired of being in the military. Okay. You're attesting to the fact that you left because of the COVID shot mandate, that was the driver. All right. So that's part of your packet to seek, reentry into the service. Now, this form right here, I got this off of the Air Force's site, and I'll give you guys the link. You can go find this. You can go find this official document on their website. So people have been posting it, but I found it from their official website. It's a legitimate document. The orange here is mine, and I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I do want to read this statement, then I want to read what I've got here highlighted. In accordance with Executive Order 14184, reinstating service members discharged under the military's COVID-19 vaccination mandate, 27 January 2025, Secretary of Defense Memorandum, blah, 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 6 February 2025, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in accordance with all these official documents. All right, now if you sign this document, here is what you are attesting to. And then this blank here is for your name, attest, I voluntarily separated from the Air or Space Force, whichever one you're part of. Now, this is from the Air and the Space Force. I've seen other documents from, maybe it was from the Marine Corps or something, but this is specifically from the Air or Space Force, but the other services probably have a very similar document, okay? Put your name in, attest, I voluntarily separated from the Air or Space Force or allowed my service to lapse rather than be vaccinated under the COVID-19 vaccine mandate, which was in effect from 24 August 2021 to 10 January 2023. My decision to separate was made freely and without coercion. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So again, let me just use myself as an example. With 18 years of service, I was relieved of battalion command because I wouldn't take COVID shot. I didn't want to order my soldiers to take it if they didn't want to take it. So for refusal to obey, actually the paperwork that I received in my evaluation report later, said that I had I had failed to obey a lawful order, except it wasn't lawful, right? Anyway, so I was fired as a battalion commander, you know, treated like a total pariah. And then I later resigned and left altogether. By the time that all went through, I had 19 years of service. But that happened to me, and similar things happened to other people in their careers all across the military. But yet you want people to say my decision to separate was made freely and without coercion. I left the service with 19 years, 3 months, and 15 days of active service. And before that, 4 years at the military academy. So 23 plus years in uniform. Now, all those don't count towards, my service. The 4 years at West Point don't necessarily count for that, but still 23 years, more than half my life and my entire adult life, pretty much, you know, pretty much. I mean, obviously the last couple of years, but anyway, pretty much my entire adult life in uniform. I mean, clearly I didn't want to leave. Why did I leave? Well, look at what had happened to me, and look at where I could see the military was headed, and that the military was departing from its charter. The leaders didn't care anything about the Constitution, didn't care anything about safeguarding the United States. They were neglecting their duties. They had turned against their own service members, and by extension, the American public at large. I couldn't be a party to that. You hear these horror stories of the way that people were treated, and they want you to sign this document and say, my decision to separate was made freely and without coercion. So let's say that I had been in the Air Force, right? So let's say I get this document. So if I sign this because I want to go back in, am I absolving anyone of coercing me to the point that I left if I sign this and say my decision to separate was made freely and without coercion? So I think this is like I don't even know. I almost it's so disingenuous. If I was going to go back into the Air Force, let's say, right? If that had been my branch of service, and if I really wanted to go back, if I were looking at this document and I really wanted to sign it, I would line this out. I would sign the document, but I would line out the part that says my decision to separate was made freely and without coercion. And I would find a way to insert a text box here and said, I faced massive coercion, which resulted in my resignation. Something like that. I'm not going to sign a document that says my decision to separate was made freely and without coercion. One, that would be a lie. But two, that would be to essentially absolve the perpetrators who were performing all the coercion. I think this is exceptionally problematic. And I'm certainly not the only one to say that, So I was appalled when I saw this, but again, not shocked. But let's move on. So I am voluntarily seeking to return to military service. In doing so, I acknowledge the following. So I will return to service with same rank and pay held immediately prior to separation. I will not be entitled to back pay, credit for lost service, or similar relief. So again, if you left voluntarily, you are signing this document saying, I know you're not going to give me back pay or credit for lost service. I will incur a service commitment. That would be 2 years. This attestation is not a binding contract guaranteeing military service. What this is saying is, I want to go back. By you submitting this document, all you're saying is, I want to go back. I'm attesting that I left voluntarily. You submitting this doesn't necessarily mean that you're even going to be offered the chance to go back. So that in and of itself is not binding. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you, because I think this is egregious. This is like one of the most egregious parts of all of this. I mean, this is terrible because they want to trick people into not reading this or not fully understanding exactly what they would be stating by signing this. I can't believe it. I cannot believe that the wording was permitted, except that I can believe it, So the last thing that I want to mention here, we've been going for a while, and but there's kind of one other thing that I want to mention. So I think yesterday, April 10th, maybe it was April 9th, but I saw it posted yesterday. So whatever, a day or two ago, the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who now owns this problem, whether you like Pete Hegseth or not, um, he owns this problem. You know, people want to make excuses for him. Oh, he doesn't know what's going on. Come on, he knows. He knows. Um, but anyway, so he was on Fox News on the Will Cain show. I don't ever watch Fox News or any other mainstream media networks. I have no idea who Will Cain is, but he was on the Will Cain show either yesterday or the day before. And I'm going to read to you some quotations that he made because he was on the show. He talked about more than just this, and I'll talk about some of the other things that he mentioned in just a moment. But let's talk about this because this is really what the video is about. So, so he said he was asked about, you know, a couple of Army soldiers who had decided to go back into the service. Okay, and by the way, I think there are very, very, very few service members that are going to opt to go back to DoD, but we'll see. I just don't think they're going to have a lot of success with this crappy plan. Anyway, um, I mean, I don't know. It's like a it's like an it's like an abused partner returning to the abuser, and then when they return, the abuser saying, "Don't make me have to hurt you again." That's kind of what's going on here. But so I don't think they're going to get a lot of people to go back. Anyway, so Pete Hegseth on the Will Cain show a day or two ago says about this plan. He says, "quote We're psyched. This is one of the promises made, promises kept by President Trump. We have followed through at the Defense Department." Then he goes on to say, "If you are a person of conscience, a person of faith who believe you shouldn't have to take an experimental vaccine in order to serve in our military, we will apologize to you. We will recognize the wrong that has been done. We will welcome you back with rank and back pay, and we want your service." Unquote. Okay. He then goes on to say, quote, "These are some of our best and brightest." And he goes on to say, "We were kicking out folks with 17 years in, 18 years in, 19 years in," unquote. And then a little bit later on, he goes on and he says that he actually would like to meet some of the troops that decide to come back in. He wants to personally meet them. Okay. Well, I'm curious. So a couple things about this. So, um, you know, he said, hey, if you believe that you should not have to take an experimental vaccine in order to serve in our military. So for the second time, he has now called it an experimental vaccine because that's the exact term that he used in his February 6th official memo. I agree with the experimental part. I don't agree with the vaccine part, but let's focus on the word experimental. I don't think it's a vaccine. Anyway, again, you can't lawfully mandate an experimental product. So when he admits that it's experimental, which he's now done for the second time, he's essentially admitting that it's unlawful, but he won't go there. Why? Does he not know the law? Does he not know exactly what happened? I don't buy that. I think he knows. I personally think he knows. If he doesn't know, it's not an excuse. You know, he's the Secretary of Defense. If he wanted people back, he would make sure there was a plan to bring people back. Here's the other thing. This is not just a religious issue. Now, you know, I am a religious person. I'm a believer. You know, Hegseth, you know, he is supposedly a very religious person. Many people are. But there are people who didn't take the shot and it wasn't necessarily for religious reasons. So there are plenty of other reasons. Now, I mean, I will tell you, so for myself, there were multiple reasons why I didn't take this shot. Some of them were religious, but some of them had nothing to do with the religious aspect. And for others, anyway, my point is that there are more reasons than just religion as to why somebody might have not wanted to take this shot. So it doesn't necessarily need to couch it in just those terms. Also, there were no mention of the legal issue. As I said before, this is critical. If DoD were to acknowledge that this was unlawful, They would have to hold people accountable. And their plan to fix this would have to be so much more comprehensive than this, fake plan. Also, he made no mention in his comment of those who left voluntarily. Everything was about people who were kicked out. No mention of those who stayed in but had their careers, damaged, perhaps irrevocably or irreparably. Yeah, irreparably. Um, and no mention of those who may have been medically harmed or physically injured. Some were so physically injured by the COVID shot that they then became medically unfit to even be able to perform their military duties and are now no longer in the military. They took the shot. It wasn't they got kicked out because they didn't take it. They took it and are so severely injured now they can't perform their military functions, and they've been, so now they're no longer in service. Now, what else did the SecDef talk about? That has nothing to do with what we've been talking about in this video, but I kind of want to end on this note. Talked about China. He talked about China's influence, in the Panama Canal and what's going on between the United States and Panama bilaterally, vis-a-vis the canal. I've been to Panama. Anyway, whatever. There were some interesting comments there. He talked about recruitment numbers and he mentioned the Trump bump. That's the term he used, that people want to serve under President Trump. Do more military service members want to serve under President Trump than President Biden? Yeah, of course, no question. I would never argue against that idea. Do I think that they're going to get a lot of people back with this plan? No. Do I think that recruitment is really going to be where they want it? I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that. Hegseth has done a lot about DEI. Now, I think that's kind of low-hanging fruit. Get rid of the DEI stuff. Of course, I support that, of course. But I think that's low-hanging fruit, and they want to be credited with easy victories there. Okay, great. But now fix a real problem. And what is this the last couple of days about the increase in the DoD budget? The Pentagon now is going to have a budget of $1 trillion. Why? What are they preparing for? Do they know that war is coming? I'm just asking the question. If you've seen my previous videos, you know that I've been saying that I think they're setting the stage for war. Not just the United States, but I think across the world. I think they're setting the stage for war. So does DoD know that? You would think if they wanted troops back, they'd have a better plan here to be able to bring more people back. I don't know. So anyway, a note about the SecDef. Do I like the SecDef? No, I don't. Do I trust it? No, not at all. I don't trust anybody in those prominent positions within the architecture of tyranny. And I don't think just because we have a new administration that means that now we're fighting against the architecture of tyranny. No, I don't believe that at all. I do think he's articulate. I do think he's smart. I think he speaks very well. Like this interview, and I watched it prior to this, the interview that I just mentioned with Will Cain. And when I have watched his other interviews, I think he's an energetic speaker. I think he's articulate. I like that about him. In some ways, he's kind of a rare breed because he seems like a very grounded guy, like just another dude, but also very smart. And now he's in this like super prominent position. So I can respect that about him. He and I are the same age. We're the same age. I think when he was in the Army, we would have been in the Army at the same time. And I think we were the same year group. So I never knew him. I don't know the guy. But if we would have been peers if we had been in the same unit at the same time or whatever, if our paths had crossed. Yeah, I probably would have liked the guy. I probably would have thought he was an okay guy. Probably would have thought he was a good dude. And he might be, if you're just hanging out with him or whatever, but do I trust him? No, I don't. No, I can't trust people that are tapped on the shoulder to hold these prominent positions within, the network of control. Now, do I think that he's really the one running DoD policy, and that, he's really the architect, now behind the coming defense strategy? No, I do not. No, he is the nominal head of a criminal enterprise that is DoD. He's the nominal head. I don't think he's dumb, but no, I do not think that he's he is truly the guy running DoD. No, no, no. I think there are players there, in the shadows, um, you know, architecting what's going on. So is he a puppet? Is he partially a puppet? I don't know. I mean, is he a charlatan? Is he being used? Um, is he being is he being used to appeal to a younger crowd? Is that part of the recruitment strategy? Maybe. Um, he kind of looks the part, but it's funny because he looks the part because he is so much different than his predecessors. He's so much younger, right? I mean, he's the age of, like I said, he's the same age as me. So if he were still in the military, right, he would be a senior lieutenant colonel or somebody about at the time of kind of being promoted to colonel right now, like a very, very senior lieutenant colonel on the cusp of being promoted to colonel, or a very, very junior colonel, right? That's where he would be. And so he's very young to be the Secretary of Defense. Is that good? Is that bad? Whatever. But he's, I do, I don't like a lot of his background. Now, he says he's moved away from a lot of his neocon tendencies. Do I think he's a Zionist? Yes, I think he's a Zionist. Do I think he's still a neocon? Yes, I do. Now, he says he's moved away from some of those tendencies. I don't know. Okay, whatever. Um, he goes out and you see these video clips of him doing PT, physical training in the morning with soldiers. I mean, that's cool. Like, listen, I'm a big physical fitness guy. When I was in the military, I was a huge believer, and I'm still a believer in physical fitness. But when I was in the military, I was always a big believer in that's a big deal, you know. But he's the Secretary of Defense. He doesn't necessarily need to be out doing PT with a bunch of guys. He's not a war fighter. He's not a war fighter. Okay, the president's not a war fighter. The president's the commander in chief. That doesn't necessarily make him a war fighter. He's a civilian. The Secretary of Defense is a civilian. Now, when I was in the military, I would see a lot of generals, colonels, generals that would do PT, and many of them were very fit. Yeah, they'd be in their 50s. They were still very, very fit. And they would do PT, physical training, with their troops. And it was a show of pride to, do it with the troops and show that, hey, even when you're a general, you keep yourself in shape. And maybe at age 52, they're not quite in the same shape that they were when they were 22. But a lot of these guys would still be in very, very good, like very, very good shape, given their age and probably wear and tear on their bodies after, 30 plus years of service or whatever. So that I totally understand. I totally understand that. I believe in that mentality. I respected a lot of these senior leaders who you would see them working out, and they would work out with their soldiers, with their troops. But he's not in the uniform. So now, do I think you have to be in uniform to work out? No, I think everybody should work out. Everybody should be fit. But I'm talking about, but in his role as Secretary of Defense, it's just kind of like, okay, like what are they using you for? That's just kind of some of the questions that I'm just kind of thinking about. Like, I mean, do we really need our Secretary of Defense to go out and do PT with the troops as often as he does? Like, is that? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's bad. It's not bad, but it is unnecessary. So I'm just wondering, what is it that he's being used for? Anyway, I don't know that I have a point there. Just some things that I'm saying here that I kind of wanted to end up on. So anyway, kind of a long video, but I appreciate you guys sticking with me. If you did, we do need to talk about these things, even if you're not in the military. These things are very important. So I would ask you to please, like the video, leave me a comment. Leave me a comment on what you thought about some of the things that I shared in this new updated guidance for this so-called reinstatement and back pay plan, and share it with others that you think could benefit from seeing this video. And till next time, thank you.